Hi, I am Grace Kozak, the interim pastor here at Central Christian Church, and this summer, while Linda is on sabbatical, we are going to be going through some turning points in the life of the congregation. One of the big turning points that a lot of folks who are newer weren't here for was our journey in becoming open and affirming to LGBTQ people in the life of our congregation. This is something that has made Central a leader in this area for a long time, but it's something that a lot of people, myself included, don't know a lot about. So during this month of June, we are going to be talking to some members of Central who were here during that time and can give us some insight into what that process was like. Today, I am joined by Beth White, a longtime member of Central, who's going to tell us a little bit more about her perception of how things went with that open and affirming journey.
Absolutely. Well, Pastor Grace, congratulations on being interim, and it's really great to be with you. So I'm thrilled to be having this conversation because I've been a member at Central for more than 30 years, and it's hard for me to believe that that's true because I don't feel like I'm old enough to have done much of anything for 30 years. I started here right after law school in the fall of '90.
Okay.
Barbara Blaisdell was our pastor. She was relatively new at the time.
Okay.
And we just within months of me coming, called a new music minister as well. Which was a very important, thing for me because music's really important to me. So I guess some background about me would probably be helpful about this issue. So I grew up in Bloomington. Dad is a professor of music. He's now passed away, but we have, in my entire life, sort of had as a fabric of my life in our community, in our home, in people who would come and visit at our home in my high school was, the gay and lesbian people were a part of that, right? So when I went out to law school, Georgetown, pretty progressive even for a Jesuit institution, and then came back here, I guess I was struck by how not everybody grew up in the same way that I did, in the notion that there was now all of a sudden this gay question. So what is the question exactly for me? And I know, I'm a lawyer, so I think about things in the context. There's a legal and political question about sort of, gay and lesbian people and integrated into employment, housing, opportunity, that sort of thing. Right. There's a moral question, I think, about what society, should and shouldn't do. And then, of course, in the church, there is a theological and religious question. So when I came to Central and discovered my church in Bloomington, nobody was using the open and affirming sort of term. Okay. But Bloomington's a very progressive community, and my dad was professor of music. I was in theater and performing, right? So lots of gay friends, lots of gay, people in our lives. So coming to Central and realizing that there was this question that we had to answer about the integration of fully integrating gay and lesbian people, into our faith community, into our lives and ability for leadership, including being pastors and other things, struck me as sort of a weird thing.
Sure.
Because it's not what my tradition had been. And it made me kind of sad and actually sort of angry because I knew what I knew about the life of the church is that we better be inclusive. And even today, not just about the gay and lesbian question, but every question sort of, are people reading the same Bible I'm reading on issues of things like the death penalty and things like racism, right? Like I get very sort of confused theologically about that. Sure. And I didn't go to seminary, and I should seek guidance from people like you. But Central started the process, right? And we call it a discernment process. That's a very churchy word, right? And in my context, it would be the context of legal cases. They're working through the courts or other. That's the way the legal system, the political system deals with those questions. But we had a discernment process. We were fully committed to the process. One of the things that was a pivotal piece of this was the AIDS crisis, which really started in the early 80s. I graduated from law school in '90, so it kind of had been happening, I guess, and that we were, under Pastor Blaisdell's leadership, the first church in Indianapolis who would do a funeral for a gay person who had died of AIDS.
Wow.
And at the time, I didn't fully appreciate what a big deal that was, because this person was not necessarily a member. The person was a friend and a loved one of a member. And for me, the whole notion that any church or mosque or synagogue or whatever, any faith community would turn someone away and say, not only can you not be a part of our community when you're alive, but we won't honor you upon your death.
Wow.
Struck me as just crazy, anathema to what I understood about Christianity. So we had this funeral. I attended. I didn't know the person very well, but I attended because I thought it was important and because I started to appreciate what a brave step it was for us as a church. And I thought there might be controversy. And when there's controversy, you pick sides, right? And I wanted to make sure I was on the right side, and I was there to be supportive. And it was interesting, like a lot of things, it turned out not to be that big a deal as far as controversy. It meant a lot to that person, that person's family, and their loved ones. Although as I recall, that person was estranged from their family for that reason, for the reason of being gay, which is another thing I find very confusing. The notion that you turn away a loved one or a family member for that, that reason. I don't remember reading that in my Bible anywhere, but that's a whole separate thing. So then we put a stake in the ground at that point, right? And then our denomination as a whole, of course, headquartered here. And also the great thing about Central in part is that many of our denomination leaders worship with us. CTS being our seminary, of course, over on the Butler campus. Scholars, administrators, others worship with us. So we have this kind of intellectual incubation of people who are very on the front line of this issue. Ordination, what we're going to do, it's sort of a don't ask, don't tell kind of thing, which is for those of you under the age of 40, that's a Bill Clinton thing with the military. Those of you don't understand or know that, but Bill Clinton had this sort of perspective is that we would do a no ask, don't tell on gay people in the military, sort of if we didn't know, whatever. And the church sort of tried to do that for a while as a denomination. And not only was that legally tricky and logistically tricky, but it was theologically and morally tricky is not even the word because that diminishes what we're talking about. It was not how the church can embrace everyone in the way that I believe God embraces everyone. So we went through this process, and I really wasn't a very significant part of the process. And the reason, and by that I mean the process within the church, our congregation, because I know myself well enough to know that I am not a very patient person. And while I'm a lawyer and I like to advocate, the notion that there would be this long and kind of discernment is the legal, it's not the legal, it's the churchy word that we use, was going to take time, right? And I get that. And I also felt so strongly about it that I wasn't sure my participation in the conversations was going to be constructive. So I intentionally took myself out of the discussion and of the process, and there was a group convened and they had lots of conversations, and then Pastor Linda arrived, and we were still on the journey, which was making me really tired about the journey. I remember being at a trustees meeting, I literally remember this, and Pastor Linda was with us, she had been with us for, I don't know, maybe a year or so, and we were talking kind of about the Open and Affirming, and I think the denomination was having some sort of gathering, like General Assembly, and I literally said, are we still talking about that? What is going on with that? I can't believe after all of these years, right? And I believe officially it was 2008. Which, I mean, really? That was the year we elected Barack Obama. We elected an African-American president in this country, and the disciples of Christ hadn't yet become fully open and affirming. I found it just shocking. So we were on a journey. It was a long journey. In 2014, when marriage equality became a thing, according to the Oberfeld, decision by the Supreme Court, I was the elected clerk of Marion County, and I performed the first same-gender wedding.
I remember that. So I didn't know you at the time, but I remember where I was when that decision came down. I was at actually a conference in Washington, D.C., and then, of course, you're on Twitter, and you're looking at all the things. And, I remember when I met you, I was like, I know her, I know her somehow. And I remember that. And then I was like, I was able to finally piece it together, and I looked up the picture from that day.
And it's been 8 years, which I found so shocking. It was the summer of 14. But I'll tell you, it was an accident of history and such a fortuitous and joyous accident. The beautiful thing, looking back to history and then forward, is that my son will never know a time in his consciousness where marriage equality wasn't a thing, where we were still deliberating the gay question, right? And I understand that religiously and philosophically, some people are still struggling, and I want to respect that, although I also know people are still struggling with racism, and I have trouble respecting that too, right? I mean, that is it's when we talk about the church and we talk about, God We welcome all, and we are welcoming is one of the things that Central feels so strongly about. We are a welcoming congregation. Can we welcome people for whom racism and homophobia is a worldview?
Right.
I struggle. I struggle.
Yeah. Well, and it's, we have, you've used this phrase, the gay question. I really admire your self-awareness about sort of abstaining, because I feel that too a lot of times. The impatience of just like, why do we even have to talk about this? About a lot of different issues. I'm like, but I, trying to respect that some people do still need to process, talk about it. So I think it's very good on your part to sort of take a step back from that process here. I'm wondering about your perspective on, so that's our past. As you look to the future of Central, especially in this moment of, 18 states taking away the right of trans girls to compete in sports. You see a lot of really, honestly, frightening movement backwards. And so if we're open and affirming, what do you see the role of our congregation sort of moving forward into a context where, so in 2000, when gay marriage became legal, 2014, I had just graduated college. It was such an exciting time, and it felt like, we're moving past a lot of stuff.
We have made real progress.
And now, only 8 years later, it's disheartening to see how easy it can be to get taken backwards.
Absolutely right.
So for our congregation, how do you see the role of people of faith to whom this is our value, this is what really matters?
It is the question, I think, for not just for communities of faith, but for other institutions too, for government, for those of us who have been elected officials, who want to be elected officials, right? Which side are you on, right? And I do, it has been disheartening for me to see the fits and starts, right? And by the way, transgender is really kind of the new shameful frontier in discrimination, right? Used to be gay and lesbian, and we kind of got past that a little bit. Now it's issue of transgendered folks and how they seem to be the new group of people that people are comfortable discriminating against, right? And it's terrible to see. But the way I try to look at all of this in context of people who are marginalized, who don't have a voice, have to depend on those of us who do. And so what I believe Central should do now, which is what we have always, in my 30 years, since I arrived here in the fall of 1990, Barbara Blaisdell in the pulpit, what Central has done during that time is put a stake in the ground, sort of metaphorically, and saying, we stand for what we believe the gospel to say. We stand what we believe God wants for us and for everyone. We have taken brave steps, and we have to continue to take brave steps. And we also, I think, not just as a church, as an institution, but individuals in this church have to stand up in whatever spheres that they're in employment, politics, social club, my son's baseball team, whatever it is. God, I believe, calls us to go out and be evangelists. I don't like to use that word because it feels very kind of patriarchal, and the evangelism movement and what we did in Africa and South, it makes me nervous. But this is an evangelism that we should lean all the way into. There is no person, there is no group of people who we can turn away from, and we can discriminate against, and we can marginalize. It is contrary to the gospel. We are unapologetic about it, and we will stand as a sanctuary and as a place of welcome and of safety for everyone. And I believe that that's what Central has done in my time here, and I want us to keep doing that.
That's really wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to share a little bit of your own story and the story of Central, and where you see us going in the future. I think that's really powerful to just say, this is where we are, these are our values, this is what we believe God says about these issues, and to be advocates not only, as a community, but as individuals. So thank you very much.
It's been my pleasure.